Okay, Whitney, how are you, my friend?
I am terrific. Thank you.
It is so nice to have you on the show because it's not often that I find a recognized expert on this topic, something that we haven't talked much about on the show before, but it's really becoming a big problem, isn't it? Which is this lack of engagement amongst people's teams. And I think a lot of people are settling for B players. A lot of people have no idea how to re-engage their teams. So that's why I'm so excited to have you on the show. Sound good?
Sounds terrific.
Why don't we just start with a very high level 60-second overview of how you kind of frame this whole issue, and then we'll spend 20 minutes or so kind of drilling into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start off by telling you a little bit of an anecdote, which I think will be helpful
Great.
to tee it up. So a few months ago, one of my CEO clients came to me kind of urgently and said, hey, one of my key people is about to leave.
Hmm.
And when she left, she said, this job's closer to home. I have 5 children. I've been commuting an hour. Now it's 5 minutes. But as she was sitting across the table from me, I had this feeling that she didn't like working here and she didn't like working for me. And I think that this is an all too common problem, especially with a CEO founder who's had this vision and people just really bought into it. They're like, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
I want to be a part of this company. And I believe that I will be able to bring my dreams to work when I work for this person. And then slowly, you find that your people aren't feeling quite that way like they used to. They don't love working for you like they used to. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what happened? And I think what happened is they came on board and you had this vision, but now you've got product to ship and you've got all these deadlines. And so to meet those deadlines, you need people right where they are doing what they've always done. And so you quickly have become that boss. And really what's happened is you've got the innovator's dilemma, but with people,
Yep.
because they need to learn in order to be happy. But in order for you to get done what you need to have done, you need them doing what they already know how to do. And so
Yep.
you've got the challenge. And so one of the things that I set out to figure out is, well, how do we solve this innovator's dilemma with people? And just quick background, I had worked as an equity analyst on Wall Street. I co-founded an investment firm with Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School. He wrote the innovator's dilemma. And as we were doing this work, I realized this framework doesn't just apply to products, it
Mm-hmm.
applies to people. And
And for people that haven't read that book and aren't familiar with it, it's basically the concept that you got to cross this chasm. There's a leap of faith that has to happen from where you are to kind of true success, right? And so you go through this valley. What is it? Valley of
Yeah, that's actually crossing the chasm. So
okay.
Innovator's Dilemma
Oh, right. That's his
is
other book.
yeah, so that's Jeffrey Moore, which is fantastic. Innovator's Dilemma is it's like this silly little thing that
Yep.
takes over the world and you've got this learning curve. And the dilemma is that once you get to the top of a learning curve or any kind of curve, it's time for you to jump, but it's scary to jump. But you
Yep.
want to stay right where you are. But if you stay right where you are, you're going to get pushed off
Yep.
because for you as an employee, and here's where we're going to talk about this, you as an employee, when you're at the bottom of the curve, you don't know what you're doing, so you
Yep.
feel challenged. So all your people you brought in, they felt challenged. You move up the curve, they're really enjoying what they're doing. They've been there 1 to 3 years. Their neurons are firing. They're putting all the pieces together, and they get to the top of the curve, and you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
top of the curve, they're a master. But the problem is that because they know exactly what they're doing, they're bored
Yeah.
and they're no longer getting those dopamine squirts. And
That's
they're
where
saying,
the disengagement starts to happen.
exactly. That's why it's
Yeah.
so high. The disengagement's so high, the engagement's so low.
So I love the way you frame it. So it's a conflict, an inherent conflict that I need my team doing what they know how to do and what they're good at today, which they can do for some period of time, but then they're going to get bored. They want to do something else, but I still need them to do this today. And that's what sets up this challenge. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. So the way
That's the biggest cause of disengagement, more than a long commute, more than being underpaid. It's really this boredom.
right. Because you and we are learning machines.
Yeah.
That we're humans, but we're learning machines. We want the challenge of not knowing how to do something, figuring out how to do it, mastering it, and starting over again, learning and leaping and repeating.
And can we be more specific? And this maybe ties to the title of your new book. we're talking about A players, what I call rock stars, because B players and C players, they're less concerned about learning and growing. Aren't they just concerned about more of a paycheck and ticking the clock and not worried about growth? Or is your hypothesis that this is everybody?
Yeah, that's my hypothesis. I mean, you're going to have some people who just don't care, but my premise is that every single person is on a learning curve, including you. And the reason that they're just taking their paycheck is because they're not learning. And so the idea of the book is, all right, if everybody's on a learning curve, how do you optimize those learning curves? And so you got this curve, a person starts out, first 6 months, they're inexperienced.
Yep.
Then they go into the sweet spot 1 to 3 years, then they get to the top. So what you want to do after at the most you can have on any curve is 4 years.
4 years in a given role.
In a given role. And that's the most. And if you're working 80 hours a week, it's going to be 2 years.
Yeah, because they master the job.
They master the job. So you as a leader, if you want your people to be engaged and therefore ship more product, you will honor this biology of change.
Yeah.
And when your people get to the top of a learning curve, you will make it possible for them to disrupt themselves. Because as you make it possible for your people to disrupt themselves, then you as an organization will be disruptive. And the way you solve this problem of, well, I need them doing what they've always done, is you optimize, you build an A team, you optimize for innovation by having 15% of your people at the low end of the curve at any given time. Because there are people, they don't know what they're doing, but they're also asking questions like, why do we do it like this?
Yeah, which is a healthy, important function for someone to play. Right?
Very valuable.
Like the Columbo, right? Questions.
Exactly. Oh, I love that. Yeah. And then you got 70% of your people in the sweet spot who I would argue at that point, when people are in their sweet spot, they're all high potentials. Because what happens when you're in the sweet spot? You know enough, but not too much.
Yeah.
And so you're learning, you're engaged, you're productive. All those people at that point in time are high potentials. And if you will push them, which we oftentimes don't,
right,
give them constraints, then they're going to be even more productive and innovate. And then you need 15%, and that's it at your high end.
And let's define at the high end, meaning the people that have arrived, that have mastered the job.
Correct.
It sounds like you don't want many or any up there, because that's where they start to get disillusioned. So what do you do about those 15%?
Bingo. Okay. So you do need them, right? Because there's this wonderful quote attributed to Alex Haley, is that whenever a person dies, it's like a library burning. Yeah, whenever a person jumps to a new curve, it's like a library burning.
Institutional knowledge.
Yeah. You basically can have a person at that high end of that curve for 6 months to a year, provided that you say to them, you've been fantastic. We need a strong finish. I understand that this plateau could become a precipice.
Yeah.
I'm going to move you shortly. You need to know that. You might not want to move, but I'm going to move you because you need to move, and I need you to move.
Right.
But there's implicit, if not explicit, agreement that we're going to find something new for you to do.
It's a contract that basically says, hang in there, give me what I need for 3 to 6 months, and here's what's coming next for you.
Right. And what's coming next can be lots of different things. So for example, at the most extreme, because I remember early on, I had a person who is an aerospace scientist, and he's like, Whitney, I'm not a generalist, domain expertise. But if you think about it, there are different ways. So, if you're more generalist, you can do lots of different types of things. But even if you're a domain expert, you can do things like different team configurations, different projects, different types of clients. If you've had all the large clients, you have small clients, different geography, different boss.
A special project, an international assignment. It doesn't have to be a completely different department or different division, but it's a way of mixing up the roles so that they go back to the bottom of the learning curve.
Exactly. And so what I would say is the only criterion that has to be in place is that they have to be in a situation where they're looking at a jigsaw puzzle, essentially, and they don't know how the pieces fit together. Yeah. So there's enough confusion from all the neurons connecting that you don't know how to make sense of it.
Right. And that's where I'm re-energized again.
Exactly. It's only in the not making sense of it that you actually can be innovative, which again is what you need people to be able to do.
So I can see how this can work in a mid to large company. how do you put this to work in a smaller company where you have less flexibility on places to move and ways that you can change the role just because there's only 9 of you or 19 of you or 29 of you? There's a
Right.
lot, you're a lot more hamstrung, aren't you?
Yeah, it's, well, yes and no, because if you think about it, so on the one hand, in a smaller company, people are wearing lots of different hats oftentimes. And so I think that almost by definition, they're doing lots of different things. And so you're probably going to be able to extend out that learning curve. And as you grow, you're going to discover, oh, we need to do this. And you can actually be fairly nimble. And so I would argue in a large company, yes, there's more things for you to do, but it's also a little bit more ossified. And so it's harder to do that. In a smaller company, you can. The other thing I would say is in smaller companies, you tend to have more 1099s.
Yeah,
And so
right.
any given time, for example, you don't have enough people at the low end, you can bring in some interns. If you don't have enough people at the high end, you can hire a couple of ringers, hired guns, or a short, a 6-month consultant. Their only job is to bring people up along the curve.
So it's more creative staffing solution.
Correct. You can synthetically get there.
Got it. What you're describing, which makes all the sense in the world, applies to your existing team, and hopefully you should be able to retain them longer, which is the whole point. How does this tie to recruiting in the first place? For example, does this SCurve mindset drive the kind of people that you should be looking for and recruiting to your organization in the first place? I guess I'm looking for the connection between recruiting part and the retention part.
It's a great question. So there are a number of different implications for it. So number one is that we oftentimes, when we're recruiting, and we are looking for people at the top of the curve.
We want someone that can come in and be productive today.
Perfect today. And that's sometimes understandable because you don't know how to do what it is you need that person to do. But when you do that, then you need to understand that your life cycle with that person is maybe a year.
You're taking a big risk, actually.
Taking a big risk because
versus an up and comer who hasn't figured it all out. They know enough to be dangerous, but they got 2-3 years in them in the role.
Right. Because if you get that high end, you can, and it's going to take them 6 months to figure out how to navigate things politically, which is part of actually being able to function in any organization. Is you need to know who you go to get what done.
Yep.
But once that 6 months done, now they're bored out of their mind, they disengage. And what are you going to do? Fire them?
Yeah. Well, they're going to leave. They're going to leave.
Or they're going to get complacent and stay, which is even worse.
Yeah.
So that's one implication for recruiting and hiring is
so just so I'm clear, I want to, before you move on to the next one. So what this means is when you're interviewing, when you're recruiting, you need to work hard to resist the temptation to look for I love your word. What was it? Ringer?
A ringer.
A ringer, which definition means they can come in and do the job today. Right. It's like a slam dunk for them because you're only going to get 6, 9, 12 months out of them. You need to resist that temptation and instead look for the up and comer. And I don't mean by age, but someone for whom this role is a bit of a stretch.
That's right. That's right. And you can get, if you think about it, this is, so one of the ways to do this actually is I think oftentimes overlooked. And this goes to the idea of disruption and playing where no one else is playing. Yeah. Here are some examples on the recruiting and hiring side. You oftentimes have people in your organization that could do the job that you need done, but they've become like wallpaper to you.
Right. Or they're so important in their current role that you say, I can't afford pulling them off this project. I create another problem.
Yes, you do. And that's where our own entitlement comes in because we're like, I can't let them do that. If you will break down their skills into their component pieces. So for example, if you've got a person who's really good on the finance side and they're great at numbers and great at running financial models, they actually might be really good in marketing. Marketing has a lot of numbers in it.
Yeah.
So if you're willing to break down, whenever you've got an equation, you can break it down into your component pieces. You might discover there are people right under your nose that could do the job who would be thrilled for the opportunity.
You're kind of redefining their box on the org chart.
Exactly.
Splitting
So
it in half or being creative about that.
right. So that's one place you can look. Another place you can look is on-rampers. People who have been out of the workforce, caring for children or caring for parents.
Yep.
People, they're credentialed, right?
Yeah.
They might need to get up to date on their skills, but the thing about on-rampers is they've been having, depending on how you look at it, either a master class or a crash course in
Yeah.
soft skills.
Yep.
They know how to manage things. And
Right.
so, yeah, their credentials.
If you can manage 4 kids, you can manage a team.
You can do anything if you can manage 4 children.
Absolutely.
Boomerangers.
Yeah, perfect.
People who have worked for you and want to come back. And I think for a long time, and even still, there's a stigma. And I think
that's changing very quickly, though, because companies are so desperate now. And if your company grows, you can go to that person and say, hey, Charlie, we didn't have the right role for you at the time. We've doubled. I want you back because now we've got something big and meaty.
Right. And I think that's exactly the way we have to think about it. But oftentimes when people leave, if they left on because they wanted to leave, there's this sense of the boyfriend or girlfriend that jilted me.
Yeah,
so we don't want them back, which is totally.
You got to set your ego aside and deal with it.
Set your ego aside because you both know you can work together. So they're a perfect fit. Yep. And then the fourth fit is fourth option are people who are self-credentialed. And there's more and more ways to credential people now, like things like degreed.
Yep.
And I think sometimes we're like, well, they've got to have this degree and this degree. And it's like, who wouldn't want someone who's self-taught?
Right.
Right. Because self-taught means initiative.
Sure.
Initiative is awesome.
Drive.
So exactly. So these are some places that you can recruit, and so not at the top of the curve, people who are unusual types of hires. And then the third quick hint that I would give is oftentimes when we're recruiting for the job as it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
Yep.
And over time, your needs have changed if you are in fact an evolving organization. And over time, it is quite likely that there are people on your team who have evolved to fill that gap. And so you're like, we need X, when in fact you don't need X. And so it might be that someone on your team can take that over and the job you actually need is completely different.
Right. So you need to ask yourself the old question, what should we stop doing? Just as much as what should we start doing?
Exactly. And a quick example on this is Michelle McKenna-Doyle, who's the CIO at the NFL. When she was interviewing for her job there, they put up a description for a VP of IT. And she looked at it and she's like, they don't need a VP of IT, which is what the person was doing before. What they need is a CIO. So she had to go in, interview for the job and persuade them what they really needed was a CIO.
And rescope it.
And so I think for you as a job, as a recruiter, if you're willing to let people come in and say, I posted this job, but why don't you tell me what we really need? Yeah.
Do you know how few candidates do that and how much they blow my mind when they do have the tenacity or the
audacity?
The audacity, to ask that question. I'm like, holy shit, here is someone that actually cares about solving the problem, not getting a job.
Yeah. It takes a lot of guts.
Like 1%. What on that note, what percent of managers and leaders, in your experience, get this concept of this S-curve, just inherently, naturally understand it and live it and breathe it? I'm assuming it's a pretty small percentage.
It's interesting. I don't know the answer to that. Here's what I would say. I would say it's smaller than it needs to be, but it's greater than we think it is. Okay. And the reason I say that is that when I was writing this book, I actually just got chills when I said it. When I was writing this book, I asked people, I don't know why this makes me cry. Isn't that funny? I asked people about great bosses.
Yeah.
And I had so many people come out and say, this person was the best boss ever and they changed my life.
But it was probably earlier in their career and they didn't have 5 of them, right? You're lucky if you have 1 or 2 great managers over the course of your career. At least that's been my experience.
I think that's right. And but what I would say is it needs to be more, but I think it's more than we think it is.
Yeah. And is your belief that anyone can learn how to do this, or do you think there's inherent? You do.
Yes, because I believe in a growth mindset. I believe it's going to be harder for some of us than others, but I absolutely 100% believe that if there is something that we want to change, we can change it, period, full stop.
Did you get emotional, just out of curiosity, because of the connection between the individual and their manager and how they were so instrumental in their life? What was it about
It's a really good
that's so
question.
important?
Why did it? Yeah, I think it's because I think we sometimes we don't understand how much power for good we have. And when you work for someone, whether you like it or not, the power is asymmetrical. And so when I or you as a manager, when the CEOs that are listening to this really understand, and I sometimes have to remind my coaching clients this, when you really understand how much power in this situation you wield, if you will wield it well,
Yeah.
the good you can do is just,
It's mind-boggling.
It's incalculable.
It's as close to godlike as you can get, because it's not a parental figure, although it does have some commonalities. The trust has to be earned, and it's so easily broken. And I was fortunate enough to have maybe 2 of those in my whole career, and I know many that never have a manager like that.
Right.
But I think you're exactly right. It's yielded for good. It is unbelievable, the impact you can have. And you can start by reading this amazing book. Whitney, I give you so much credit. It's a phenomenal, simple framework that is absolutely doable. How can people get their hands on the book and learn more about this work that you do?
Well, you can buy it wherever books are sold. I mean, you can buy it at Amazon, you can buy it at Barnes & Noble, you can go to your bookstore and pick it up, and
Great.
It's on Audible. I got to record it, which I'm really happy about.
And the reviews have been great. So I really hope people will invest the time with Build an A Team.
Thank you.
And do you do, aside from the book, do you do consulting work? Do you work with companies on how to put this into place, or do you give them the book and say best of luck?
I do both. So my practice is a combination of, as I alluded to, I coach CEOs, I do keynote speeches, and then I also go into companies and consult with them on what is this going to look like and moving it forward.
Great. Well, they would be very lucky to have you in their arsenal, because if you can do this one thing, it just seems like you can slow down the revolving door of people in your company, in and out and in and out and in and out. And like you said, this lost institutional knowledge can, aside from the financial cost, it can just lend itself to just huge results for your business.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Whitney.
Thank you for having me.